Welcome, everyone. My name is Lizelle May Foss. I am a member of the HEAL Data Stewardship Group. Thank you for joining today's FreshFAIR tutorial titled Identifying and Reusing Datasets in the HEAL Data Ecosystem. Next slide, please. Today's tutorial presentation portion is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants. To start, I'll briefly walk through what we'll cover today and how the session will be structured. Next slide. The first 30 minutes will focus on the presentation portion, including a brief introduction to the two HEAL data reuse tools featured in today's breakout rooms, the HEAL Data Platform and HEAL Semantic Search, or HSS. You will also hear from our guest speakers who will talk about data reuse and help set the stage for the hands-on tutorial. After that, we'll move into the tutorial portion. During that hour, you'll join a breakout room focused on either the HEAL Semantic Search or the HEAL Data Platform. Our goal is for you to leave with a clearer sense of how these tools can support HEAL data discovery, evaluation, and reuse. Next slide, please. So before we dive in, I'll briefly introduce HEAL Semantic Search and HEAL Data Platform for anyone who may be unfamiliar with them, since these two tools support data reuse in different but complementary ways. The HEAL Data Platform helps researchers explore the broader HEAL study landscape by navigating study metadata, identifying investigators and repositories, and locating datasets. HEAL Semantic Search focuses more on concept-based discovery. Rather than relying on exact keyword matches, HEAL Semantic Search helps users identify related studies, variables, and common data elements through shared biomedical concepts, synonyms, and relationships. So together, these tools support both study-level discovery and deeper semantic exploration across the HEAL ecosystem. So as you explore these tools, keep in mind that many HEAL studies are still actively ongoing or completing their primary analysis. As a result, the volume of datasets available for secondary analysis will continue to grow over time. So what we're seeing now is really the early phase of reuse within the ecosystem as more studies complete data collection and deposit their data into repositories. The opportunities for cross-study and secondary analysis will continue to expand. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters who will share perspectives and experiences that help demonstrate how data reuse can be applied in real-world research settings. Our first guest speaker is Dr. Anna Zajacova, professor of sociology at University of Western Ontario. Trained as a demographer and sociologist at Princeton University, Dr. Zajacova studies chronic pain as a population-level phenomenon, examining how social conditions shape its prevalence, distribution, and trends among U.S. adults. Her work often involves secondary analysis of nationally representative datasets, particularly the National Health Interview Survey. Her NIH-supported research has been published in more than 90 articles, including in Pain, the Journal of Pain, and the American Journal of Epidemiology. Following Dr. Zajacova, we'll hear from Urja Mehta, a data science intern supporting the HEAL data ecosystem. Urja contributes to data reuse efforts by helping identify and evaluate high-value datasets for secondary analysis. She recently completed her Master of Science in Computer Science and is preparing to pursue PhD programs. Through her work, she is helping strengthen data discoverability and reuse across HEAL, supporting the initiative's broader goals of enabling cross-study insights and accelerating translational research. And now I'll hand the presentation over to Dr. Zajacova.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Liesl. It's terrific to be here, and I've noticed a number of people in the audience whose name I recognize, either as an amazing collaborator or other power users of secondary data. So next slide, please. I will talk about the secondary data analysis from my perspective as a demographer. Next slide, please. So the overview, this is primarily, you can think of it as a pep talk to really try and explore secondary data. So I hope you'll be able to identify some publicly available data sets for pain research, recognize and navigate key repositories. This is primarily other elements of the webinar. Describe just general workflow, navigate the resources, including funding, and I'll mention a little bit about methodological challenges. Next slide, please. So I'm, as Liesl already said, a demographer and sociologist. I'm have been studying population health at the population level, meaning national level, primarily in the U.S. So that means I primarily use national surveys, which are gathered on general population. I will talk about those obviously more. And I have over 20 years of experience with these analyses, but I also started collecting my own data, but still these are national data sets with several thousand people where we designed a study. It's still often an omnibus health survey, and then we hire various companies to distribute these data. So both as a production and a user of data is my experience. Next slide, please. So why should you consider secondary data analyses? The key element is that it's a very fundamentally different perspective from data gathered from one's own cohort or patient cohorts or lab work. The cost of accessing secondary data is extremely low, usually. So one doesn't have to design one's own study and recruit subjects, etc. Literally, with some data sets, you can come up with a question in the morning at 9 a.m. and have some data or some results by 5 p.m. Now, that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you can think of these oftentimes as getting preliminary data, preliminary picture of what's happening in the population, so that then you can drill down and study that with your own much more focused studies. It's also a really, really good way if you have advanced undergrads or graduate students who need a project. It's a very low barrier entry point for students or trainees, again, because data have already been collected. And I would also say, in a very encouraging way, it's a great way to encourage collaboration across fields, across disciplines, with people who have access or experience with different data sets. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about with secondary data? I will primarily focus on nationally representative general population surveys. So these are surveys that are collected for tens of millions or sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars, typically by federal agencies, just because they're the only ones with that kind of money, such as the Center for Disease Control or the Census Bureau actually does some of those data collections for the National Center for Health Statistics. So I just want to clarify, these are not clinical cohorts or referral patient cohorts or even patient registries. And they're also not electronic health records or insurance claims. These are basically large surveys that are done at the population level with tens of thousands or thousands or even sometimes hundreds of thousands of people interviewed annually. But secondary data also include smaller investigator-collected data sets, such as those shared via HEAL, sorry about the typo, and other repositories. Next slide, please. So this is not, please, I'm not going to go into the detail here. The point of this slide is to just say there are a lot of US data sets. These are all national US data sets that have some pain measures. I started with the National Health Interview Survey. That's the top one, which is an annual cross-sectional study, which has actually is considered the gold standard for pain surveillance in the US population. But there are many others. Most repeated cross-section, so a respondent is only observed once, but many are longitudinal, which is really valuable, such as the HRS, and about the middle of the slide, that's the Health and Retirement Study, which has a couple of questions on pain and has been following people for, by now, several decades. And there are sort of others. So point is, there are these data sets that are worth exploring. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to these large US national studies, there are large international studies. Again, I would just highlight a few. The Health and Retirement Study has what's called sister studies, like a share for most European countries, ELSA for the UK, for England, CLOSA for Korea, etc. So for those of you interested in international comparisons, there's data out there. The Gallup World Poll has a terrible pain question, to be honest, but 146 countries. And the UK Biobank you may be familiar with because they do have a truly incredible module on pain and a lot of other data on, by now, over 500,000 UK residents. And then, in addition to these, there are major data repositories, such as the ICPSR, Harvard Dataverse, or the HEAL Data Platform. The HEAL Data Platform, of course, is primarily for pain research, but the ICPSR and Harvard Dataverse are examples of other data sets which sometimes may have pain information, and it's worth keeping those in mind. Next slide, please. So, what are the strengths of these data sets? I've already alluded to some. One is these are often free data collected on, I mean, free. Well, we pay for them via taxes, but to the user at that point, they're free. They're publicly available. Oftentimes, the registration is only a formality, not always, but often. So, very easy access. The low burden is also extends to IRB because these are de-identified publicly available data. They are typically IRB exempt. You would have to check with your institution to ensure that you are in compliance. But again, there is typically exemption. These are large samples. By large, again, I mean thousands, tens of thousands, or many hundreds of thousands across different data sets. Key general population, these are not pain patients or specific samples. There are very rich covariates typically because these are general surveys, so you know a lot about each respondent's background and other conditions, and some of these studies collect at least some biomarkers. And finally, a major strength of these data sets over smaller investigator data sets is that the documentation tends to be very clear, comprehensive, easy to understand. There are really good user guides that are worth exploring and to orient yourself. Next slide, please. Now, of course, like everything around us, there are limitations. Probably the key one is that the pain variables collected are limited. There can be sometimes just one pain question, or there can be multiple pain questions, but never going into the detail that one would desire. Sometimes the covariates, there's a covariate that you would really love to know, but is not in the data. The years collected, the population groups may not fit your needs. Say some of the data sets are only for older adults, etc. Like with every other data set, there are issues of missing data, and something that's common to basically worldwide data collection is that there are declining response rates, which affects generalizability to the population. But I do want to emphasize that these limitations may constrain the scope of the questions, but they do not invalidate this approach as such. Next slide, please. As an example, we've published a ton of papers, and many others did, including, again, those of some of the audience members here. The first paper, for instance, we examined pain trends in most recent years, so before and after COVID-19 pandemic, and we found that the prevalence surged from 2021 to 2023. But you can do all kinds of other things with NHIS. We were able to explore prevalence and correlates of prescription opioid use. In a paper, again in pain, we examined chronic pain across sexual minority adults, and we have a follow-up under review. We've examined the geography at the subnational level of pain in the US and in Canada. And there are, of course, important ways to link pain to other health dimensions. So the last paper, for instance, examined a causal relationship between chronic pain and mortality. So there is a huge scope of studies that can be done with these kinds of data. Um, um, so there's a link if anybody's interested. All right, next slide, please. In terms of, if you've never done this, how would one go about it? Well, first is one needs to find the data. How do I find data that I could want for my question? So I have some vaguely shaped questions. I want to find data to answer it. Well, typically for me, it's finding data sets that are used in relevant publications. So as I read my background, I note those. You can do some direct search, such as with the HEAL data platform that will be covered later, but also AI tools such as Elicit, where you can look for specific questions and look for other papers that have used particular data sets. And always ask around, email the authors. I know it sounds obvious, but we sometimes are sometimes are hesitant to do that, but people tend to be wonderful sources of information about the data that they've used. And then again, in terms of accessing, is oftentimes only a brief registration is needed, and the data are often then directly downloadable, and again, on your own to check IRB status with your institution. Next slide, please. In terms of sort of now having the data, how does one proceed? The large data sets do have a lot of available documentation. And again, by and large, it is high quality. It's worth taking one's time to read it and study it carefully. It's always good to go back to the published studies that use the data, that they will give you a good sense of, oh, this is how they coded a particular variable because of whatever reason. So like you'll get a lot of hints on how other people have used the data. There's the need to do a very extensive initial data exploration because you don't know the subject. You need to get to know who is in the data, what's in the data a little bit more perhaps than with one's own data set. And again, I would do the same thing as I said before, which is I would encourage that we consider consulting or collaborating with investigators who have used the data previously. That really helps shorten or change the learning curve. And something that one doesn't tend to worry about as much with one's own data is that for the nationally representative data, special attention needs to be paid to survey design, so weights and variance adjustments and missing data and question flow. So you're not missing something because that question is a conditional on a prior one. Next slide, please. This is something that, so funding is available. The NIH does fund secondary data analyses, not to the degree that it funds other types of research, but it certainly funds secondary data analyses. People in my field mostly run on NIA or NICHD funding for secondary data analyses. But it may require that you consider a different study section than your primary ones. And the reporter matchmaker is a great tool to get a sense of, for your intended aims, what might be good study sections or even institutes to fund your work. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, secondary data analysis, I think, is a rather underutilized resource in pain research. The types of questions that it can answer are different than what clinical work or laboratory work answers. So we can look at national prevalences, comorbidity, social determinants, understudied groups, etc. So it's a distinct tool for distinct class of questions, but fundamentally, there's data out there. They are really easy to access, and the work is fundable. Thank you very much, and I will now pass to Ursha.
Thank you, Anna. And that was really insightful. Today I'm going to be presenting a data reuse case study using NIH HEAL datasets. Can we go on to the next slide? This is basically we are taking existing independently collected research and asking a new question with it. So the HEAL initiative has been building infrastructure to make exactly this kind of work possible. This project is a practical example of that in action. Next slide, please. So we have combined two HEAL studies, both of which used GAD2 measurement instruments to assess anxiety among patients experiencing pain and opioid use disorder. We wanted to analyze whether demographic variables such as age, gender, and ethnicity are correlated with anxiety or not. While the two studies measured anxiety in very different clinical contexts, we wanted to see whether there were differences in how anxiety manifests across demographic groups. Next slide, please. Yes. The two studies we worked with were completely different. The first study was a cross-sectional cohort focused on sensory phenotyping in neuropathic pain patients. We had screened 821 participants, and out of them, only 82 complete records were found. While the second one is more of a longitudinal study on using TDCS to reduce opioid relapse. So, in that, we had 404 total sample size, and out of that, we could only take out 198 data, complete records. So crucially, both studies collected the same core variables like age, sex, height, ethnicity, GAD2 scores, which is what made combining these two data sets possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so merging the two independently collected data set required careful work. We built a pipeline that loaded raw data from both studies and renamed aligned shared CDEs, cleaned the duplicate and missing records, and then combined everything into a single data set of 280 participants. To identify the equivalent variables across studies, we used variable search platform, which helped us match semantically equivalent measures between data sets. The trickiest part was recoding variables. Variables like employment status, sex, ethnicity were all coded very differently between the two studies, and those studies had to be resolved before any analysis could begin. Can we go on to the next slide? With 280 total participants and 8 shared features, we had a workable data set. One number really stands out though is that only 4.6% of participants, that is only 13 people, met the threshold for higher anxiety. This extreme imbalance became a central challenge for our modeling. It is important to note here that the threshold was set by the researcher was not set by the researchers working on these two data sets. The threshold was something that we came up with to check the higher anxiety scores. Our linear regression explained about 18% of variance in GAD scores using demographics alone, which is modest, but it it should be noted around that. Can we go on to the next slide? We tested 4 models, linear regression, logistic regression, a decision tree, and a random forest. So the classifiers all reported high accuracy, around 96% average, but that number is misleading because, like mentioned before, high anxiety cases are so rare in our data set that the model essentially learned to predict low anxiety case almost every single time. When we look at the recall for high anxiety class, it's 0, meaning models can never actually identify a true positive. So, in this context, accuracy tells us very little about real predictive performance. The random forest was actually the most informative for the feature importance. Age alone accounted for 41% of predictive weight, with height following very nearly after. Whereas in linear regression, ethnicity showed the largest coefficient, which is something worth exploring further with when we have a balanced data set. Can we go on to the next slide? There were four major takeaways from the analysis we did. First one was that the open access repositories and shared CD infrastructure make this large scale data reuse possible. The second is that variable harmonization requires careful and deliberate work, especially when datasets use different coding system for different concepts. Third is that if we have severe class imbalance, it can make traditionally classified accuracy misleading unless techniques like oversampling or weighted models are used. And finally, variables such as height and ethnicity merged as potentially important predictors that deserve a deeper investigation in larger and more balanced data set. The fully notebook will be shared in the chat. The full notebook, the GitHub link will be shared in the chat, and we will be walking through those pipeline steps one by one during the tutorial session. So feel free to follow along. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Lizelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Urja, and thank you, Anna, for sharing your perspectives and experiences with us today. I have a few more slides before we transition over to the breakout sessions. As a reminder, these slides will be shared via email with all registered attendees, so you'll have access to the links you see, and also the GitHub repo link will be included in that follow-up email. So next slide. In addition to our presenters in addition to our presenters, we would like to acknowledge the behind the scenes team that diligently worked to bring this webinar to production. Next slide. For our next webinar, it will be in July. We will not have a webinar in June. So hope to see all of you in July. It will be focused on HEAL compliant repositories. And these repositories will also be talking about their data reuse tools and how to access data in those repositories. So that's Thursday, July 16th at 1 p.m. Okay, so next slide. For the tutorial portion of this webinar, we have two breakout rooms. Your breakout room options is room 1, which is HEAL Semantic Search. You will get an overview of how to use HEAL Semantic Search, how to find studies using biomedical concepts to conduct an analysis, similar to what Urja presented on. And we'll also showcase how the HEAL Semantic Search communicates with the platform tool. And then the room 2, HEAL Data Platform, will walk through how to use platform's workspace after you find a data set of interest. So like Urja said, she will be present in room 2 to walk through her notebook if that's something that you're interested in attending. And the platform room will also showcase how platform complements the HEAL Semantic Search. And I believe Anna will stay in the main room if you have any questions specific to Anna. And once you're in the room, your facilitator will guide you through the session format. And if at any point you'd like to switch rooms, you can return to the main room and our team will assist you with switching to a different breakout room. And if you have trouble moving to a room, simply drop your preferred room in chat if that once that gets activated. And once we move into the breakout rooms, we will not reconvene in the main room. So the office hours is where the presentation will conclude. And so thank you for joining us today. We will now stop the recording and open the breakout rooms.